Thank you so much, Wendy. First of all, we want to thank you for inviting us to speak in this gathering. We're very excited to be part of this and to tell our story, which is really actually, I think, rather simple. Anyway, so my story was that my husband Paul and I, very quickly, we were high school sweethearts who reunited 35 years after high school. And we had 10 really beautiful years together. I lived in New York on Long Island with my family, and he was living in Michigan. And so we would travel back and forth and see each other on a regular basis, but it was still long distance. But it was back in the day when I was a freelance writer. And at the time, the economy, around 2009, the economy collapsed in the US and I think even globally. And the print industry went digital. I couldn't make money the way I had for so many years. And so ultimately I went bankrupt and lost my home to foreclosure. And Paul said to me, come let me take care of you. And by that time, my children were young adults. And so I moved to Michigan, but I wasn't even there a year before he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed. And when Paul, way before Paul passed, way before, decades before, I had been a student of Abraham Hicks, and I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with Abraham Hicks. And a few years before Paul died, Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham, non-physical teachers, her husband passed. And so many of their recordings around the time Paul was ill and when he died were about having your beloved partner or spouse crossover. And their message was that grief that you experience, this is just their message. If this doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. But their message was that grief is just a period of adjustment to when we adjust to interpreting our loved ones with our ordinary five human senses to interpreting them with our inner senses that are deeper and richer. And they said that Esther's relationship with her husband, Jerry, got even better after he died. And I thought, well, I don't know about that. I mean, Paul and I had a magnificent relationship. It was no work at all. We just got along so easily and beautifully. It was a beautiful romance. But I thought, well, they said, do everything you can in your power to make yourself feel happy again. And so that's what I set out to do. I tried very hard to do every single thing in my life to make myself happy. In the beginning, I could barely get out of bed for a long time. So it wasn't like I became happy overnight. So it was step by step and inch by inch. And a friend of mine said to me, Mary Beth, you should really join a grief group. That might be helpful to you. And I thought, I don't know, Abraham's not big on focusing on the grief. And she said, oh, you might meet a friend. So I went to a local grief group, and there were a bunch of ladies there whose husbands had died. And the facilitator was a lovely woman, and her husband had passed as well. And she said that at one point, she handed a handout to everybody, and it had all the reasons that you should go to a grief group and process your grief. And the final reason was so that you could say goodbye to your loved one and focus on the people who are living with you. And I'm pretty mild-mannered, but when I read that, I went, what? Why would I ever want to say goodbye to the most beautiful person in my whole entire life? And everybody, all these little heads swiveled to me like, it was a concept that just was not part of this group. And so I eventually wrote the nice facilitator lady a little thank you message, and I never went back. But then I didn't really have anybody to talk with about it. So another friend of mine recommended that I go online and join a widow's grief group. And maybe these groups are helpful for some, but I went on this group and I didn't even really participate. I just read some of the things people were saying, and they would say things like, my Charlie died 34 years ago and I sob every day. And I thought, oh, I don't want my life to be like that. So finally, I found a different group. This is going to end soon. Trust me. Finally, I found a different group that was for people who wanted to continue the bonds they have with their partners in spirit. And so I joined that group, and that was a little bit more to my liking. And as it happens in many of these groups, it does attract mostly women, the majority of women. There were some men, but majority of women. And William was in this group too. Now, I didn't know William at all. William and I have never even met to this day in person because he lives in Texas and I live in New York. But I noticed that William started writing things about his crossed over wife, Irene, that he was starting to feel better and better. And his way of helping himself feel better was different than mine. But I sort of started to resonate with him in this topic. In this group, I had been asked to be an admin. And if you're ever an admin in a Facebook group, you know that you can talk with the other admin outside of the group. And when William started posting these things, the other people, the other admins started saying, that's impossible. Nobody can start to feel better. That's really ridiculous. And they thought that his posting about feeling better and closer to his wife after she had not passed long before, that was impossible and set a bar too high for the rest of the members. And William can tell you himself, but I believe he was asked to leave the group. And so I remember talking to my sister on the phone after that, and I said to her, I don't know what to do. I feel like I don't even resonate with this group. And she said the very thing, it was ironic. She said the very thing that people whose partners have passed never want to hear. She said, well, Mary Beth, I think it's time you moved on. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, start your own group. So I messaged William, who didn't know me from, beans. And I suggested we start our own group where you could be happy and you could deepen and have a joyful connection with your most precious person. And his answer was, okay. And that's how we started. And in the beginning, it was just William and me. But the reason for we always said to people, we said to each other first, and then to people as they started to join our group, ours is not a grief group because we're not grief experts. We're not psychologists. We're not therapists. We're not mediums. And as I would say, we're not even all that smart. We're just two people who had their most beloved person pass, and we want to continue having a joyful romance with them until the day when we have our great grand romantic reunion with them. And that's really the beginning and end of it. So, William, did you want to jump in here?
Sure. So Irene and I were married 27 years before she died of breast cancer in April of 2017. And we both believed in the afterlife. But, like for so many people who are busy with life, it's not really something you put a lot of attention on. We would watch various medium shows because she liked watching them. I enjoyed watching them with her too. And I had been many years a reader of the Zamet website. I greatly enjoyed that website. Gave me a lot of good information and resources because I was also interested in other things that they were talking about there, and because I had a lifetime of what you would call paranormal experiences dating back to when I was like 7 years old. So I'd always been interested in this stuff. I come from a family that's been interested in this type of stuff, and I've had many experiences. So when I didn't really expect that kind of grief when Irene died, since I already believed in an afterlife, and I already believed that she still existed and she'd still we could still be together. But it hit me like a sledgehammer. It was like anything I've ever experienced, and both my mom and dad and oldest brother had already died, and I didn't feel anything compared to this. This was devastating. This was despairing. And so, like Mary Beth, I had a decades-long experience of working with my mind, my psychology through various techniques to resolve various issues and to make changes in my psychology that was beneficial to life and beneficial to my relationship with Irene. And so I actually already had the tools to start. And my immediate thought about this was to frame it as a psychological thing, that I understood that there was something deep in me that was reacting as if Irene was gone forever and I would never see her again. That's the type of pain it produced. Even though I didn't consciously believe that, that's still how I was reacting. So I set about using these techniques like affirmations, visualization, imagination, deliberate internal dialogue as a kind of a triage just to stop the bleeding. I mean, it was horrible, and so I used these techniques, and I was in a very fortunate situation that I was alone, ran my own business out of my house, and I could basically spend 24/7 doing this. And so that's what I started doing. I just started massively trying to reprogram whatever subconscious pattern or idea that was generating this pain. Now, I also knew that a large portion of the pain was just like going cold turkey off of a wonderful drug. I mean, that's just going to hurt. Irene was like this, wonderful drug during that whole time that helped me to feel or made me feel whole and complete and satisfied and happy, very happy. So, of course, there's going to be there's going to be some pain just because of that, some withdrawal because of that. But what I was experiencing was it was far deeper than that. It was terrible. And so after about 4.5 months, 4 or 5 months of intensive self therapy, I realized that I hadn't had a serious bout of grief in a while. And then after about 3 or 4 more months, I realized I wasn't even sad anymore. And so what happened is, and so during this whole time, I'm sure a large part of the process was Irene was just giving me the most amazing signs and the most amazing experiences. They were flabbergasting. I was writing these things down in a blog, and I just thought nobody's ever going to believe this happened. So she was really good and really talented right from day one about giving me these signs and interacting with me and communicating with me. Yeah, she had to actually convince me that it was her I was talking into in my head and not just me. I mean, she had to beat that into me with several huge validation signs. So that helped. That was very helpful. I'll make sure and credit her. About this time, at some point in time, like Mary Beth, I went to a online regular widowers group and stated that that I had done that I had accomplished uh, eliminating the grief because I hadn't felt it in months, and had established a very enjoyable way of interacting with my wife and of continuing our relationship. And I got kicked out of that group immediately and threatened. Somebody reached out on private message to threaten me. So I said, well, that's probably not the best place for me to be anyway. So that's when I joined the group Mary Beth was talking about, and one of the admins there contacted me, and I will be generous and say we came to a mutual understanding that I should leave the group. And I could understand the concerns because they were talking about I was setting the bar too high. It was unrealistic. They probably thought I was some type of con man trying to sell something. That's what the regular grief group accused me of. So Mary Beth reached out, and honestly, the only reason I said yes is because I thought we might have 5 or 6 people joining this group. I can deal with 5 or 6 people. So that's what I thought. We'd just be 5 or 6 of us, maybe tops, talking about this, and it was just to be able to talk about it in an atmosphere that we weren't having to deal with a bunch of negative feedback. So this is one of the things that we wanted to talk about today. Probably get more into it later, but one of the things that I found in both secular groups and afterlife groups and spiritual groups was a lot of pushback on the idea of romantic partners continuing their relationship, both now in what we call the transdimensional state and then after we die. And I don't know exactly why. I've done a lot of research on this, but each category of grief, like with a parent-child relationship, or with a brother, sister, or friends. They all have their unique problems, their unique things about them. But for romantic partnerships, unlike the other ones, it's almost universally treated as a replaceable or disposable relationship. And like you would, anybody with any sense wouldn't tell somebody if their child died, well, you can get another child. Or if their parent died, you can get another parent. Or if their brother or sister died, you can get another sibling. Or even if their friend died, they wouldn't say something like, well, you can always get another friend. Those seem like a little bit crazy things to say, but we face people in our group face that on an almost daily basis. The idea that this is somehow a replaceable relationship. And I don't want to say that all romantic partnerships or marriages or whatever are like this. That doesn't make one better than the other or anything like that. But some of these and the people in our group hold that our relationship with our person, we feel it as being utterly irreplaceable, and that we can't just go find new love again. That we can't just there's something we don't want to do. And so it's often also characterized as, well, you can lead a full life again and be happy again, as if I can't do that with my wife, even though she's dead. I can do that. I can still do that with her. And we face some other, the group faces some other issues. We'll get into that later, but I want to move along here a little bit with the purpose of our group is really to just be, it's kind of a peer-to-peer support and information group. So we don't have any like top-down edicts. We have rules, but with no top-down ideas about how to go about this or how you should do it or what you shouldn't do. It's very open to people bringing in information or resources or their own ideas and experiences, because not everything works for everybody. It's not every path is the same. Everybody's on their own path. And so it's just we have kept it, and it has been just a marvelous thing that I can't believe actually exists on the internet, of very friendly and helpful and kind and loving people supporting each other, and understanding that, yes, we do have different beliefs about these things. That's fine. We can have them. Nobody's trying to impose beliefs on anybody. It's sort of like a spiritually neutral group. We're not advocating any particular spirituality or views or anything like that. My own contributions are almost always in terms of psychology and secular perspectives. And so that's really what the group has grown into. So Mary Beth, you want to go on from there?
Yeah, thank you, William. What William said about, it's kind of weird. I'm sure everybody here has had this kind of experience where, in hindsight, it's wisdom is wisdom. And when I look back on my own life, and William was telling you a little bit about it, things that he did before he experienced the death of his beloved. There were so many things that I did through the years that really prepared me to help begin this group. And for example, and I know a lot of you did all these similar things. I had joined a meditation group at one time. Like I said, I followed Abraham. I read a lot of books. There was a point in time where I still live outside of New York City. And I made a point every single month to go into New York City and listen to a different metaphysical speaker. And so this is before Paul and I were even together. And, I learned about visualization and like I said, meditation. And like William said, that he had a lot of those metaphysical kinds of experiences happen in his life, and I did too. Which I'm not going to go into, but I have a lot of stories about things that I focused on and imagined that actually came true. So I was really primed. When Paul passed, I was ready to go for the answer, whatever the answer was that Abraham supplied. The problem with Abraham, though, is that I think that if anybody ever listens to them, I think their advice is marvelous for how to live on earth, and they do say we don't die, and of course you will see your loved ones, but beyond that, they're not very specific about that kind of thing. And in our experience, talking with people for now, oh, by the way, we began our group in, I wrote it down, wait a minute, I forget, 2018. So it's a while now. And every single week, every Saturday, we have a 2 hour Zoom group where we meet with people. And so, like all of you, when you are in a group like this and you hear all the different stories, we've heard, every single story about how people cross over and the people who are shattered, who are left behind, and how they're trying to pick up the pieces and all of that. We've heard all of that. One of the things that Abraham said that when I started to feel better and had no grief, I sort of ignorantly expected people who came to our happy group for the first time to be happy. And I was shocked when people started coming in and they'd be sobbing because maybe their partner passed just, a little while ago. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know how, I'm not a grief counselor and I didn't know how to really respond to that. And I remember Abraham said something about when you're walking along the road and your friend next to you, you're walking with a friend and your friend next to you falls in a ditch. It doesn't help if you jump in the ditch with them. And so I tried in work. I don't even think of it as working with people, but in sharing things with people, I always tried to not like be overcome by their grief because that wouldn't help them. I didn't believe. And so William and I and other people who began to feel better and better, we would just kind of maintain our status quo and kind of, I guess, put it out there that this is available to anybody. And as William always says, once you get past the grief, the beauty and the wonder and the romance and the love that you can experience is what Abraham promised. It's far, far better even than you can experience on earth. And William taught me a lot of stuff. William also said that, grief serves a purpose because I'll just speak from my own relationship. Before Paul got sick, I thought I couldn't love anybody more. Like I said, we got along beautifully. It was a lovely romance. And then he became ill and I loved him even more. And then he died and I loved him even more. And so until that happens, it's almost impossible to imagine, as William would say, that it exposed the depth of love. And that's what I really want for people. I want for people to hang in there and to continue to focus on all the things that they can do to help themselves feel better so that they can get to experience that too, because I really do believe it's available for anybody who wants it. Now, some people are a little bit more comfortable maintaining some grief. I've heard people say that. I feel better, grief honors my person, and that's fine. That's not my belief. If they want to believe that and they want to feel that, that's fine for them. But it's not fine for me. That's not what I wanted. So William was saying like that he always, and maybe he'll talk about this a little bit more, but he always says that it's kind of a psychological state. And you can go into whatever psychological state you want. You can go into the room of grief, or you can go into the room of having this romance with your partner. The difficulty in the beginning for a lot of people, it certainly was for me, is that, again, as Abraham says, I should be their manager. Their marketing manager. As Abraham says, what happens is the thinking of them triggers the missing of them. And so initially, I remember a day or two after Paul died, and I was a mess. A friend of mine said, "You were barely functional." And I remember I was brushing my teeth, which that in and of itself was a miracle that I was able to get toothpaste on a toothbrush. And I remember I wasn't even thinking about Paul. And all of a sudden, the sensibility of him rushed in, like he was right there. But then immediately followed was the grief. Like he's there, but he's not there. And again, that's the getting used to it part. But I did other things besides what William talked about. For example, I never spoke of Paul. I mean, he may have done these things too, but I never, ever, ever spoke of Paul in the past tense. I never called myself a widow. Some people are comfortable with that. I was not. So I never said that. And I, on purpose, did things to make myself feel happy. Believe it or not, I took tap dancing lessons. I always wanted to do that. And then I volunteered in a school because I had been a teacher and I love working with little kids. So one day a week I did that. And then I joined Toastmasters, which is an international speaking organization where people can practice speeches. And I gave many speeches about the afterlife and about Paul and about everything that I was learning. I used to sit in bed, I had my whole bed filled with books and just read and read and read and read and read. But that also reading, like trying to educate yourself about the afterlife, I believed in it, but I didn't know much detail about it. But sometimes you can run into things that are controversial, or you get different pieces of information or pieces of information that don't sound comforting to you. And at first I was kind of blown apart every time I read a book that sounded weird or odd or uncomfortable to me. And I learned as I matured in this whole process, and this is what William and I, at least, and other people in our group offer each other, is that if you hang in there, you learn to sift and sort and keep what resonates with you and toss out the rest. It doesn't mean it's not right or true. It just means it's not for you. So those are the kinds of things that we share, the kinds of things that we did to get through it and to get to the happy place, and the kinds of things that we suggest to people who run into these issues and problems. And there's a lot of, society is in general, we found, is not supportive of this notion at all, as William was saying. They're just not. And so if you want to move ahead and you want to remain with your partner or your spouse who is now invisible to the rest of the world for the most part, you can't really expect a whole heck of a lot of support. If you get it, that's great. But you have to learn how to manage that and how to be with family members and friends, and relationships change. And sometimes for people, when their partner passes, other practical considerations. Somebody dies and all of a sudden the breadwinner isn't winning bread anymore, or children's parent is gone, or I mean, gone. And so there's a lot of different considerations that come up in our group. And I was just saying to William today that I think the best thing about our group is that if somebody new comes in, or even if somebody who's been there a while says, man, I've had a rough week, and tells us, everybody in the group kind of, like it's like a big giant hug. Everybody offers helpful information. And they all say, look, you can take it or toss it, but this is what worked for me. And that's really been helpful. It seems to have been helpful for a lot of people. We have had a lot of people in the course of 8 years or so who have moved from deep grief to really having no grief at all. And so I don't take credit for that. I know William doesn't either. It's just the dynamic of the group and the helpfulness that everybody has for each other. The end of my TED Talk.
All right, I'll pick up here. Uh, we currently have about 2,100 members from around the world, all walks of life. 2,200. 2,200. And so we do have rules for the group of who's admitted into the group. So what the rules of the group are that to become a member, you have to have physically been with your soulmate, let's just call them your soulmate, in this life. They had to have died, and you have to believe in the afterlife, and at this time be committed to continuing your committed relationship with that person. And we have some other rules we won't get into, but it's over the past 8 years and 2,200 now people. It was an education for both Mary Beth and I about about who we can allow in the group that isn't disruptive to the group, and what kind of story we can allow in the group that's not just going to cause a massive problem in the group. And I won't get into particulars, but it's been an education. And so all of our rules are based on serving as many people as we can, but maintaining the kindness and supportive nature and the integrity of the group. So there are some love stories that I don't doubt they're real, but they're just too out there for us to be able to bring into the group. So we do have some limitations on that. Uh, After a couple of years or so of Mary Beth and I running the whole thing ourselves, uh, we've very fortunately found some people who uh, we thought capable and of the right psychology, so to speak, to help us manage the group, and promoted them to moderators. And then eventually Mary Beth and I kind of stepped down, even though we're still, consulted quite a bit to let some new admins, with maybe a little more energy and a little more, I don't know,
How about
a
you?
little youth, yeah, a little more youth, take care of it. We have some very young people in there, all ages really, and a lot of them have dealt with things that I don't think Mary Beth and I ever had to deal with really in our lives. So they were better managers of that type of information. So that's has to do with who we allow in. We have a whole bunch of resources in the group. I've written 3 books on this matter. After my wife died, I give that away for free in PDF form to anybody who's a member of the group. They're also available on Amazon as cheap as I could, but it was never my intention to make a living off of it. Uh, so we have links. Other members of the group have written books. There's a lot of interviews from Mary Beth and I, and other members of the group have had interviews that are on YouTube and available on podcasts. I also do, and I know several other members do. Several other members are members of various widowers and widows groups, and they do a little outreach that way. I'm on various sites online, such as Reddit, in the widowers group in Reddit, Afterlife group on Reddit. Uh, Trying to do a little outreach there. And so my intention there is, yeah, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything or change their beliefs. I'm just trying to find people who write something who seems like they're looking for something like this. And so I don't reach out in terms of spirituality. And this is one of the things that we want to get to is I have found that over the years with the members of the group and my outreach, that the people who really want to be in this group, what they're really looking for is just to find out that their person still exists, and that their person is still their person, and that they can continue that relationship with that person, and that when they die, they will be rejoined with their person. And most of us don't don't really care about anything else. I'll just put it bluntly. What we really care about is just that. Is we that for a lot of us was really pretty much everything in our lives, uh, and that's why when Mary Beth talks about grief, after Irene died, I realized that there was nothing but a big empty chasm of nothing in me anymore. It's just where Irene was, everything was gone. Nothing in the world mattered to me. There was no, no humor, no interest, no anything, because Irene means that much to me. And so that's one of the reasons in our resources that we vet our resources. I mean, we have links to like the Zamet group and various books that support this, and various videos, Jurgen Zive videos, others videos, and podcasts. And of course, it's a group effort, but we always vet it and try to make sure it's as non-triggering as possible, because now we don't discourage people having spiritual beliefs, of course not, or discussing spiritual matters. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But some people find a lot of this stuff too much, especially in the beginning. It's just too much to think about. Soul groups and higher selves and spiritual progress and the higher planes of existence, or various like soul contracts. And one of the things that continually scares our people is when they run across information or when you die, you're a glowing orb, you don't have a physical body, or you kind of merge back into universal consciousness. That's a terrifying thought to a lot of people in our group. So we try to steer them away from that. My position on all that, and I think basically the general consensus of the group is that there's way too much information out there and evidence that shows that when we die, we'll have physical bodies, we'll have a physical environment, we'll be in a physical environment, and the people we love will be there physically with us. That's really all most of us want out of it. We'll figure the rest of it out from there. So as Mary Beth said, we have a Zoom every week. We usually begin that Zoom with updates. People can update from their past week, any signs they've had, or basic stuff about their life, or troubles that they're having, or successes. And then that's followed by a topic. Usually somebody brings up a topic pertinent to our relationships. And I often think of our group as more of a relationship group than anything else. It's how to maintain this relationship now while your partner is on the other side, how to develop it, how to maintain it, how to communicate with them, methods of communicating with them, of feeling them, of inviting them into your life, and methods of changing the way you think of life going forward from what you have lost to what you have gained, to what this opportunity, the kind of opportunity this can give you to lead what a lot of us think of as a very magical and beautiful part of our love story. Okay. And that's, I think, a very positive way to think about this is that one of the things I love about this situation, and I'm so appreciative, is I get to be the guy in this story who shows his love for his wife, even through the worst possible situation that she died. So that's very meaningful to me. I love that. Irene and I talk about that all the time. But so let's see. Mary Beth, you want to take us
Yes.
down to the end here?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I said this before the official meeting started, but I wanted to, from the bottom of my heart, thank Wendy Zamet. When Paul died, I was just a mess. And just, I look back on some of the writing I did in the first few months, even though I had this goal to feel better. I had a goal to feel better so I could feel Paul with me more easily. That was my goal. But I was really a mess. And when I look back on my writing, I am surprised now how bad I was. I would say I sob and sob and sob all day long. All day long. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And during that very painful time, I emailed, I don't know what prompted me to do this. I didn't know Wendy. She didn't know me. She was this, leader, and I was just some person in a puddle on the floor. And I wrote to her and emailed her and said, is there an afterlife? Will I see my husband again? Just like William said, people are desperate. Please, please, please. And she wrote back a protracted email, explained a lot of things to me, and it was such a comfort. And through their afterlife newsletter was how I came to learn about the Leslie Flint recordings, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And especially they had a little notation in the newsletter at one point about the Annie Nanji recordings. And so I started listening to them, and they were such a comfort to me. And I was so excited by them. But they're hard to listen to because the Annie Nanji recordings from the Leslie Flint website, she speaks with a Swedish accent. Leslie Flint himself has a British accent. And then Dinshaw Nanji, her husband, Annie's husband, has an accent from India, and then there's a Cockney accent from, the Control, and there were all these accents and everything. And I didn't even know who he was, but at the time I emailed Carl Jackson Barnes, who he says he's the curator of the site. That's how he likes to define himself. And I said to him, there's so many transcripts for some of the recordings, but not all of them. And he said, well, we work with volunteers only. We don't have the money to pay people to transcribe these recordings. And I said, well, can't you put them in? I know that they have, transcription services. And he said, no, the recordings are too old and they don't work well with those. They have to be done manually. People have to listen to the recording and type everything out. And so I said, I'll do it. And I began transcribing those recordings, which is a whole different experience than when you just listen to them. But when you listen and you have to go back and listen to every little, I considered it like a sacred task, every little gasp and breath in and breath out. I mean, they became part of me. The Annie Nanji recordings really, really saved me because these were people. Craig Hogan said, we regard the Leslie Flint tapes as some of the strongest evidence for the afterlife because they're the direct voices of the people who live there. And so when Annie Nanji would reassure her husband, I remember he said to her one time, he said, forgive me if everyone's listened to these 100 times, but this is like the sweetest moment. He said, oh, when I see you again, will you be able to feel my kiss upon your lips? And she said, oh, my darling, when you get here, our world is more solid and real to us than yours is to you. And of course, I will feel your kiss upon my lips. And so it was things like that. I would play them over and over again. It was things like that that just reassured me and said, yes, it's going to be. And she would say, her husband would always lament, oh, by the way, he's talking to her. Would say, oh, remember when we used to go in the Queen's Garden and look at the roses? And she would say, oh, my darling, any of the experiences that we shared on Earth, we can recreate here. And so I had 2 years of doing that before we even started the group. So I was pretty well equipped, if I may say so myself, to tell people when they were concerned. They said, oh, I'll never have a birthday celebration with him again. I would say, yeah, you will. You will. Anything you want, you can have. Anything. And it was, all backed up by by Annie Nanji. And of course, there's a billion other marvelous recordings there. But I became friends with Carl Jackson Barnes. And actually, I was born in Ireland. So a few years ago, when I was visiting Ireland and visiting my family, Carl made a trip over from Scotland, and Carl and I met in person. And that was a big deal to me. Very big deal. I want to say something else. I know we're probably pressed for time here. Wendy, you can tell me. But one of the things that people worry about a lot when their partner dies is what to do with the stuff. Now, some might say, well, just keep the stuff. You don't have to do anything with it. But sometimes people have to move or they have to downsize, as with the case with me. When I went to live with Paul, his big life dream was to renovate a commercial building into a house. So he was in the process of renovating a ginormous bank building into our home. And when he passed, that was in Michigan. When he passed, I stayed there for 5 more years. And I think one of the reasons I stayed there for 5 more years was because I didn't want to get rid of the stuff. And it was we weren't cluttered because the building was so huge, but I knew I would never, ever be able to move to another space that large. And I knew I would have to give up some of his things. And I talked to William about it. And William said something that was so beautiful. I hope I don't get emotional here, but he said, I think your relationship now is less about the stuff and more about the love. And that permitted me, when Paul was physically focused, he used to donate to a men's shelter in the area where we lived in Battle Creek, Michigan. So I began donating his clothes, and it filled me with joy to take armloads of his things to donate. That was very exciting. And of course, I saved plenty for myself to keep. And then I sold the bank building after 5 years of living there, but I didn't have a place to move to. And this was in the middle of the, what do you call it? The virus. I can't even think of the name.
The COVID.
It was in the middle of COVID. So I didn't know if I wanted to move back to Buffalo, where I have relatives. Paul and I grew up in Buffalo, New York, or if I wanted to move all the way to Long Island, where my adult kids lived again, but it's expensive to live on Long Island. So I wasn't quite sure. I didn't have an end place to, like, I couldn't take a moving van to some place. So I packed all my stuff in, pods, moving pods, and the moving pod company will move your stuff. I don't know how this is in Australia, but here they will move your stuff in pods and store them where you're staying until you have a permanent residence, and then they will move the pods near your permanent residence. But they told me there were videos that said how to pack the pods and blah blah blah. And they said in the videos, do not put anything of importance in the pods because we do not take responsibility. If there's a fire or something happens, if they get robbed, we don't take responsibility for that. Pack anything of importance in your vehicle. And so I got a couple neighborhood kids to help me, and I carefully packed every single thing that Paul had given me, his clothes, the cards, the mementos through the years, the notes, the love notes, his cremains. I packed everything in the car, along with all my personal papers, like tax papers and bank papers and stuff like that. And I traveled to Buffalo to visit with a friend, and she said, Mary Beth, you can stay here as long as you want until you find a place for you and Paul to live. And it was a lovely neighborhood in Buffalo, I might add. And the next day, I woke up and went out to my car, and it had been robbed of every single thing that Paul had given me, everything, including his cremains. It was gone. And I sobbed. I couldn't even believe, I couldn't even kind of comprehend it. And I called my kids, and both of them said, Mom, nobody can take Paul from you. Nobody can take Paul from you. And I thought, this is kind of like the ultimate thing. Like now it's really just Paul and me. It's not, I mean, I had a few photographs left over. And when I unpacked my pods, I found a few more things, but the bulk of it's gone. And it was really a test. I don't like to use the word test, but it was really a challenge for me to get past that. And Paul had a great sense of humor. This is just a really quick story. Paul had a great sense of humor, and I talked to a really good friend of mine. And I said to her, Betsy, I've had this friend for over 50 years. I said, Betsy, they took Paul's cremains. I had them in a teapot, a beautiful teapot my sister had given me that I had never used. And I packed it in bubble wrap and put it carefully in a box. And they took it. They didn't know what it was. They didn't knowingly take his cremains. They just took the box. And my friend said, oh, Mary Beth, what if they think that Paul's cremains are some sort of an herbal tea and they brew him and drink him? And I just burst out laughing. I thought, that's got to be Paul. That's got to be the hand of Paul who would do something like that. And that got me over it. And so when people say now in our group, they have to move or they have to downsize or they don't know what to do with this stuff, I always say what William said to me. Your love, it's more about your love and less about the stuff. And that's what I'm going to kind of leave you with. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you, William.